Hello everyone, RFG here with a review for Post Trauma, a third-person puzzle-focused survival horror game with inspiration from early 2000s genre classics developed by Red Soul Games and published by Raw Fury, available on PC, PS4, 5, Xbox One, and Series consoles. Opening with Roman, the main character, trapped in an empty subway train in a surreal landscape, you'll have to solve multiple puzzles, encounter a number of creatures, and make your way through several locations to escape this twisted dimension. Environmental exploration and puzzle solving is how you'll be spending most of your time, and your brief time in the train shows you the basics. Exploring your nearby surroundings is fairly natural, as approaching nearby interactable objects will have a prompt appear on the top right of the screen, and at other times the fixed camera angles will generally put you in view of visual clues. Most of the areas you come across will be somewhat compact and have interconnected rooms to travel between, so finding the puzzle to solve that's impeding your progress is usually the first major step you'll need to help you focus on what clues you need to uncover and how to navigate the environment. Most of the game takes place in fairly compact areas, but some areas can still have points of interest spaced a decent amount of distance from each other. To save time, Roman can sprint by holding the run button, which gradually depletes his stamina meter that you can see on the top left of the screen. Running out of stamina requires the meter to refill before being able to sprint again. As for navigating the environment, unlike many other games in the genre, there isn't a traditional in-game map function. Maps for some areas can be found in the environment and can have multiple spots to find them to help you determine where you are, but they are limited to specific locations and can't be accessed at the touch of a button or through the inventory menu. Your inventory menu is split between holding 10 key item slots at the bottom and 5 usable item slots at the top. Your key items will be used exclusively for progression purposes like unlocking doors or used for puzzles. To use a key item, you can bring up the inventory menu and select the item from there to use at the appropriate point of interest. Key items will be discarded from your inventory automatically when they have no more use. If you're not sure about one's use, you can put your cursor over it to get a description. Usable items can be weapons, ammo, and medical kits. Weapons and ammo types take up their own slots in the usable items inventory space, while each medical kit takes up their own slot. Moving your usable items into the first 3 slots of the inventory space allows them to be accessed through shortcut bindings rather than through the inventory menu. You can move usable items through the inventory freely if you want, whether that's to move them for shortcut access or between your inventory and a storage chest. Storage chests can be found in save rooms, and any items stored in them will be accessible in any other storage chests you come across. Save rooms are spread fairly evenly and are usually placed in locations that feel fairly centralized to various points of interest. That being said, there is no autosave feature, so using these save rooms at certain intervals is recommended to record any progress, and at least at normal difficulty, there's no limit to using them. Save rooms are also free of enemies, so they also give you a chance to look over your inventory and move things around, since accessing the inventory can leave you vulnerable to enemy attacks in other locations. Enemy attacks will cause damage to your health, which you can see in the green bar at the top left of the screen. Medical kits can be used to refill your health after taking damage, but you can perform a quick back dodge to avoid enemy attacks using stamina. If you're out of stamina, you won't be able to dodge or sprint. Having a melee weapon equipped allows you to attack by pressing the attack button. Melee attacks use stamina, but are still usable without it, though constant use can keep you from regaining meter back, preventing you from dodging and sprinting. You can also gain ranged weapons, and while these don't require stamina to use, they do require ammo, which you can reload with the reload button, and similar to melee weapons, are fired with the press of the attack button. There is no aim or ready weapon button for melee or ranged weapons, but you are able to lock onto enemies. You are unable to run while locked on, but are able to dodge. Enemies in Post Trauma are pretty limited in number, and not all of them necessarily need to be confronted to progress the game. Boss encounters are also limited, and while these need to be defeated to move on, the game is concentrated more on its puzzles than combat for progression. Like many of the survival horror games that Post Trauma is inspired by, there is a focus on collecting key items and using them in the correct places to push forward, but these key items are generally used to initiate a logic puzzle to solve before you're able to proceed further into the game. These logic puzzles often require you to find clues within the environment in some way. That can be through interactable objects you find, or seamlessly shown in the environment through the various fixed camera angles. Many of these logic puzzles can also be multi-layered, where the information from an interactable object includes information that can be used with other environmental clues to help solve them. These clues aren't always within the same space or room as the puzzle itself, so in some situations you may want to revisit an area or explore further to find some more relevant information if you're having trouble solving one. And if you're having trouble solving a puzzle or feel like you're forgetting a clue, there is no file or documents menu that stores this information in-game. It's up to you to remember, or take notes, or snap a picture on your phone as I did for some of the clues found in the game. That doesn't mean every puzzle in Post-Trauma is long-form enough to require some form of note-taking or clue storing, but it is the long-form puzzles and how they're designed with the environment and the clue placement in mind that I think Post-Trauma excels in. As I mentioned early on, the areas are mostly comprised of interconnected, somewhat compact rooms with points of interest fairly evenly placed from each other, but since the main areas of some acts are designed to open up paths, that makes returning to some locations more convenient. This mostly helps if you feel the need to go back and forth between locations to get a full picture of what a solution to a larger puzzle is, but nothing is ever so far to feel particularly tedious, and that's if you're not being pragmatic. I do still recommend to have some way to keep track of clues you may think are important nearby, as it's still far more convenient than returning to locations for 1 or 2 clues over and over again. This isn't a determining factor about the difficulty of puzzles, since many of these are logic-based. Some will most likely be easier for some people to figure out than others, and while there's plenty of puzzles that can be self-explanatory, some others may have controls that aren't as clear. This may be confusing at times, but makes sense considering the game does try to avoid having too many prompts or forced interface elements, similar to how many of the visual clues are presented. But that's also because the overall visual presentation is fairly strong. Most areas take place indoors, but there is a decent variety of locations which reverts, and for the most part they do a good job of providing horror aesthetic and imagery, with the fixed camera angles doing a good job of showcasing more than just clues. Roman also has a good amount of detail on his character model, but some locations and other characters do feel a little lackluster in design by comparison. Enemy and boss designs do fare better in terms of detail to some of the other characters they'll meet and play as, but the combat can feel stiff or awkward. That can be due to combat with hitboxes of melee attacks, or depending on the camera angle with ranged weapons. It's not that frustrating, as combat is pretty scarce and not hard to deal with, as inventory management isn't really much of a factor either, even with the limited item space. Despite these issues, Post-Trauma still has a tenseness to it due to its overall sound design, something that matches the atmosphere in pretty much all of Post-Trauma's settings. For those who appreciate voice acting, dialogue is fully voiced and fits each character appropriately. Story is a bit harder for me to place. Thematically, it's not hard to understand, but the actual story feels less defined. The tone throughout the game overall felt consistent, though there is a looseness in how the story progresses. Part of this may be due to how the game is split by acts, or it could be due to the occasional character switch, which will mostly place you into a first-person perspective and then back to third-person with Roman, but in both situations usually leads to a change to the setting. Though even with the somewhat loose narrative, the game does feel complete, though it can be pretty short, and there really isn't much to offer for replayability. There is a hard difficulty which allows enemies to deliver more damage and limits when you're able to save, but this option is available from the start. For those looking for a new survival horror game that has inspiration from the early 2000s in its gameplay and visual design, Post-Trauma has its flaws but does fit the bill. The fixed camera angle style of survival horror hasn't exactly been abandoned, but it feels rare that it's used for more than just nostalgia's sake. Combining actual gameplay elements with it doesn't just help bring progress to the genre, but also helps give Post-Trauma its own identity. Post-Trauma's implementation of multi-layered puzzles with its level layouts and clever use of clues in its visual presentation is something that is worth experiencing for fans of survival horror. If you're wary of the flaws I mentioned, I do still recommend visiting your relevant store page for more info, but at the same time, I'm interested in seeing what Red Soul Games is going to be working on next. And that's it for me. Let me know what you think below. Thanks. Bye.